Density is defined as being the compactness of particles within an object.
I'm not really sure what that means.
Well, that's why I have an experiment to help you out with it. You ready?
Yeah!
Let's go.
What are we doing in this experiment anyway?
Well, for this experiment, we're going to take different household liquids and test their density relative to each other.
So, if we're using household items, they're all safe, right? Like we don't need to use eye goggles?
Correct.
So, what materials do we need?
Well, first, we're going to need a graduated cylinder. However, since we're using household items for this experiment, we can just use a simple cup. Let's go find one.
Okay. Perfect.
So,
What's next?
next, we're going to need honey. Do you happen to know where any is?
Yeah, follow me. Here we go.
Third, we're going to need some maple syrup.
Back to the pantry. What's next?
Next, we're going to need milk.
Okay.
After that, we're going to need dish soap. Now we need a glass of water.
I'll fill it up. What's next?
Next, we're going to need vegetable oil.
This is a lot of materials.
We're almost done. After that, we're going to need some rubbing alcohol. And lastly, we need food coloring for the rubbing alcohol and for the water.
Is blue and yellow okay?
Yeah, that'll work.
So, now that we have all the materials, what do we do next?
Well, first you should pour this rubbing alcohol into this cup, and then we will color the rubbing alcohol and the water using the food coloring.
Why do we need to color them with food coloring?
Well, we're going to color them in order to distinguish it from the rest of the materials, since these materials are clear.
Okay, I'm going to color the water blue and the rubbing alcohol yellow.
Alright, that'll work. Experiment. We will be taking these different materials and pouring them into this cup. Since each material has a different density, they will settle at different heights of the glass. So Amanda, the gold represents honey. Where do you think honey will go?
So, the heaviest ones are supposed to be in the bottom and the lightest ones on top, right?
Correct.
Okay. I think honey will go on the bottom because it's really thick.
What about maple syrup? Next is milk. Dish soap. Where do you think that one will go? After that, we have water. And after that comes vegetable oil. And lastly, rubbing alcohol.
So now that I've made my predictions, do we pour it in this order?
Well, we're going to pour it in the right order, and I'll show you which ones you got wrong.
Okay.
So our first material is actually honey. You got this one right.
Yay!
This is the most dense of all the materials we have here. Pour it in. Alright, that's good. For our next material, we have maple syrup.
I thought it was made of dish soap.
Yeah, unfortunately, maple syrup is actually more dense than the dish soap. So this one you will pour next.
Okay. Is that good?
Yes, that's good. Next, after that, we will have milk. And unfortunately, you also got this one wrong. You put maple syrup. You're just one step ahead of the game.
Okay. I just pour it in?
Yeah.
Aren't they gonna mix?
Now if you pour it lightly, milk has less of a density than syrup, so it should float on top.
Whoa. Look at that.
Alright, that's good. For our next material, we have dish soap.
I thought it was rubbing alcohol.
Yeah. Dish soap is more dense than rubbing alcohol, so it goes next. Alright, stop. Next, after that, we have water. And for that one, you guessed milk. Unfortunately, since you got a few out of order, most of them will probably be now out of order.
Oh.
You can now pour the water.
Do I pour the whole cup in?
No, just a little bit.
Shoot, I kind of spilled a little.
Yeah, this experiment's actually sort of messy, so you might want to keep a few paper towels on hand.
The next one I guessed was vegetable oil.
Hey, you got that one right. So,
Yay!
pour it in. Alright, that's good. Next, after that, we have rubbing alcohol. This is our last material. It is the least dense out of all of them, so it'll float on the very top. Unfortunately, you also got this one wrong.
I spilled again.
Now, if we wait a few minutes, it'll settle out and we'll be able to see the results very clearly.
This was fun.
Now that this has had a few minutes to settle, we can clearly see the differences between each material. The bottom is honey, so that is the most dense. Next is maple syrup. On top of that is milk. Then we have dish soap. Then is water. And on top of that is vegetable oil. These two have a very similar color, but you can see the line between them is actually right here,
Oh yeah, I see it.
with the vegetable oil being on top. After that, we have the rubbing alcohol, which you can clearly see on top. It is the least dense, so that is why it floats on top.
This all makes sense now.
So class, now that we have learned that density is defined as being the compactness of particles within an object, we will see what this actually looks like. So, the honey would look something like this. See, the molecules in that are very compact. The maple syrup would look something more like this. See, the particles here are less compact. Then we're just going to skip to the very last one, which is rubbing alcohol. The particles within this would look even less dense, so they'd look something like this. Now you can see the difference between the two. The honey particles are very compact, maple syrup slightly less, and the rubbing alcohol much less. The particles here are much more spread out than the other two, and that is why it floats on top. So class, the most common differences that we see in density in everyday life are between solids, liquids, and gases. The particles in a solid are very dense. They're the most compact out of the three different states. As you can see, these particles are very, very close together. The liquid, in the particles of a liquid, they're much more spaced out. Liquids are less dense because of this factor. And in a gas, which has the least density of the three states, particles are very, very spread out. This is why solids sink in liquids and gases go on top of liquids, because solids are the most dense and liquids are less dense and gases are the least dense. So class, now to wrap up our experiment, we're going to place a solid into the liquids that we experimented with earlier. Let's see just what happens. Although you may not have been able to see it very well, the penny is actually right at the bottom. This happens because liquids are much less dense than solids. So when we drop this solid penny into these liquids, it floated right down to the bottom because it has more density. So Amanda, now that the experiment is over, what have you learned today about density?
I learned that density is the compactness of particles within an object. If a substance is more dense, the particles are closer together, and that's why it sinks. And then when something is less dense, they're far apart, and that's why it's on the top.
What did you learn about the three different states and their density?
The three different states are solids, liquids, and gas, and solids are the most dense because they're the most particles closest together, and then liquid, and then gas.
I'm really glad that you learned a lot from this hands-on experiment today. Make sure to complete your post-lab questions, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks for a great and educational time. That was good.